Welcome back. 5:46 on Daybreak. The dawning of the Twitterverse. Two occasions when our nation was in mourning and when the Bills and their fans were suddenly seeing red. It all made news this very week in decades past. Dave McKinley has our weekly walk back through time when all those stories and more were news to you.
10 years ago this week.
This ranks pretty high in craziness.
And we're not talking about digging up a New Mexico landfill amid rumors that Atari had dumped a cache of E.T. the extraterrestrial game cartridges years prior, which turned out to be true, by the way. No, we're talking about struggles with new trends and technology. We'll start with the NYPD's dubious entrance into the Twitterverse, when one of its initial posts encouraged folks to tweet photos of police doing their jobs, only to quickly become familiar with the term trolled when there were hundreds of photos of cops roughing people up instead. In Colorado, the first state to legalize recreational pot, it was also the first to arrest a fourth grader who stole his grandparents' stash and was selling it to his young classmates. And colleges gearing up for graduation ceremonies found themselves enacting new policies against grads stopping in the middle of their walk across the stage to engage in a new phenomenon called taking a selfie. Closer to home, it was also the week the Riviera Theater installed its restored 70-year-old marquee, and when several members of the Buffalo Gills filed suit over working conditions, and when a few days later the management firm that operated the cheerleading squad answered back by suspending operations, which explains why you haven't seen the Gills since this week in 2014. 20 years ago this week.
An arrest warrant has been issued for the King of Pop following an indictment by the Santa Barbara grand jury who investigated the Michael Jackson child molestation case.
More than a year later, following a 4-month trial, he would be acquitted on all counts. Meanwhile, the first Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant was being demolished. This week's News to You Pop quiz: in what state was the first Kentucky Fried Chicken opened? And what stands on the site of that historic restaurant today? Paris Hilton was still a big deal. So was Russian tennis star Anna Kournikova. And the speed limit on the 990 went from 55 to 65. It was also the week when word came that Pat Tillman, who gave up a career in the NFL to become an Army Ranger and fight terrorists instead, was killed in a friendly fire incident in Afghanistan this week in 2004. 30 years ago this week came word of the death of our 37th president, Richard Nixon, who passed away after a stroke at the age of 81. Reaction came from voices you did not know.
He seemed pretty good.
And others quite familiar.
His reconstitution, to me, has been absolutely amazing over the generation since, that departing under the conditions he did.
This was back at a time when folks still minded the words of their mothers. Don't speak ill of the dead, and if you can't say something nice about someone, and even Democrats politically opposed to Nixon still found something decent to say about him upon his death.
And President Nixon did many good things as president.
His contributions in the area of foreign policy was truly outstanding.
And he went out of his way to give me his best advice.
Nixon was laid to rest in California this week in 1994. 40 years ago this week.
There's a special event at Sheas Buffalo tonight, a gala rededication of the Mighty Wurlitzer.
The evening marked the culmination of 8 years of restoration work on the organ, 13,000 volunteer hours, and over $100,000.
Renowned organist Lynn Larson doing the honors there. And believe it or not, it was also 40 years ago this week that the Bills rolled out the red helmet, switching from white for reasons you might remember, but which we'll let former coach Kay Stevenson explain.
Because of the people that we play in our division and so much white downfield, and many times the quarterback doesn't see the entire jersey or whatever. He just sees helmets going through there.
The red helmets would be retired 21 years after they were unveiled this week in 1984, when it was all news to you.
Okay, so the answer to this week's News to You Pop quiz: the first Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant, which was being demolished 20 years ago this week, was not in Kentucky. It was actually, do you know, Patrick?
No. What?
Utah.
Utah?
Yes. It was torn down so that the National KFC Museum could be built on the site. So there's some finger-licking good trivia for you this morning.
Did it say what city?
The video was like Herman something.
If you would ask me like what state, I would obviously assume it wasn't Kentucky.
Right.
But Utah would have probably been my last choice.
No, you'd think somewhere in
the Midwest or South.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, a little spittle on you. Let's take a look outside.